I do a lot of videos on video games, and I do video essays on the games that I play. And I found my groove late last year with some Fear and Hunger content, and I really appreciate all of the support I've gotten from those videos. Fear and Hunger is quite a unique horror game, and the reason I did a video essay on it is because it was such a uniquely horrific experience, and rarely anything gets me motivated to make a good video essay unless it's something truly special. Which brings me to this video. I know I don't seem like someone who reads books, but I do make an effort to read every night. And I've got a good amount of books, like A Clockwork Orange, The Marquis de Sade, Flowers for Algernon, and yes, even the elusive Bunnicula and the Celery Stalks at Midnight. Although I love reading them and I try to take something from most of the books I read, nothing ever gets me passionate to the point of making a video on it. Not even close. But if you believe anything I've ever said on this channel at all, I promise you this. Near the end of this book, I was gripping the book with a knot in my stomach because of how gripped I was in this horrific book. Also, there is so many secrets and theories in this book, I cannot cover them all. So obviously I won't say all the theories, so I want you to read it yourself if you haven't. If I didn't mention your favorite theory, I'm sorry, but this was just my experience and understanding. The book, as you've probably seen from the thumbnail and title, is named House of Leaves, a book published in March of 2000, but from the interviews from the author, Mark Z. Danielewski, he worked on it for around a decade. And we'll get into the author a little later due to a theory that I and many others share about the book and its contents. The book itself is considered by Google to be a horror novel as well as ergodic literature. I'd forgive you if you didn't know what ergodic literature means because before researching this video, and to go even further before I even wrote this paragraph, I also did not know what that meant. Ergodic literature is a term or genre that means the book or text requires you not only to read the book or text, but also navigate it non-linearly. So, to make it easier, the book is not read like a normal book, and requires you to search through the text backwards and forwards to find answers. In House of Leaves' case, the book is fiction, yes, but it is mostly written to look like a scientific dissertation. You know, like how in high school and college you'd have to write a paper and cite your references and add footnotes? Yeah, it's like that. Not only that, the text sometimes falls apart, literally. Let me show you an example. On page 94, we see a pretty average looking page of what could be a real college paper on a movie. But then if we skip a little and turn to page 126, you can see some of the problem. The page is divided. There's a metaphorical hole in the page, and you can see the text backwards around the left side of the page. Then if we go even further to page 233, it gets weird. Words are strewn across the page seemingly for no reason. There's tons of blank space as well as seemingly random word placement. The book falls apart, and it's hard to read it. So, to make it even easier, ergodic literature is a book or text that makes it hard for the reader to read the book normally and makes the reader backtrack and really think about how the book works. Before we begin, I would like to mention how I learned about this book myself. It's kind of a stupid way, but I feel it almost adds to the story. Around a year or two ago, I was watching a video by the YouTuber Some Ordinary Gamers, a huge channel with millions of subscribers. He was covering a mod of the game called Doom, an old FPS game that I personally have never played, but he called it one of the strangest and creepiest mods he's ever seen. The mod was called House.wad. In the mod, you walk around a house killing enemies like you normally would, but eventually a closet appears. It wasn't there before, so you'd naturally go in it, only to realize that the closet doesn't make sense. For some reason, on the outside of the house looks like a normal house. But when you enter the closet, it far extends past what should be possible for the architecture of the house. The closet goes on for miles, when the house itself is a normal 2-story house. It isn't possible for it to go on for miles. Anyway, to make a long story short, it really gave me the sense of uneasiness that famous liminal spaces like the backrooms would give you. So after watching the video and being intrigued enough, I learned that the mod itself was based on a book of all things, one called House of Leaves. So I looked it up and I saw these ergodic literature staples and I got very intrigued. So I bought myself the book and started reading it. Which, like I said earlier, I have never been so amazed by a book ever like this. All because of a stupid Doom mod that I once saw in a random video. We're going to get into the walkthrough of the entire text soon, but before that I want to say one more thing. This book is very strange, in the fact that although it is fiction, it's something of a layered fiction. What does that mean? Well, in this story, you cannot tell for sure what is really happening, or what you're supposed to pay attention to. The book is purposely hard to read and understand at times. In House of Leaves, You are not reading 1, not 2, not 3, but perhaps 4 stories at the exact same time. But here's the cool part. You don't even realize you are. Going into the book, I expected it to be a normal-ish horror fiction novel. But before I knew it, I was in 2 different stories being told at the same time. Then by the end of the book, I realized I wasn't in just 2 different stories, but 4. I'm not going to spoil it too much yet, but the 4 stories that you are reading are the main scientific dissertation, the editor's story of how he thinks he is editing the scientific dissertation, and what is really going on in the whole narrative. And finally, how the story may have something to do with the real author of the whole novel, Danielewski. Okay, now finally, after going over 4 pages of script before even getting to the first words of the book, here is your warning. If you have not read House of Leaves, I highly suggest you read it before you watch this video. I know when I watch a video on a topic, I usually will say, yeah, whatever, I'm just straight up not doing that. Describe to me what's going on while I play video games on my other monitor, or something. But I am telling you, this book is really best experienced for yourself first. So if you have read the book, or if you really just want to see me describe the book, let's get into it. Also, if you haven't noticed, I obviously have a background video of me playing Call of Duty Zombies, just so the screen isn't completely black during the segments where I can't show anything, so you can enjoy that too, I suppose. Now, this book is super confusing, I understand that, and even times while I recorded this, I had no idea where I was in the book. So I'll do my best to try to explain it as best I can, as this story jumps around a lot. We'll be going back and forth between Johnny's story in the footnotes and the Navidson Record. I'll do my best to show what is happening on screen by putting plot points on the screen of what's happening to who. Now, finally, let's get into the main narrative of House of Leaves. There will be a discussion on what it all really means after this, but let's start with the actual story first. Okay, final warning, here we go. As soon as you open House of Leaves, one of the first pages shows you a strange message. The page says House of Leaves by Zampano, with notes by Johnny Truant. This is your first warning that this book is not normal. On the very first page, the second warning comes a few pages later. A message from Johnny Truant himself before anything even starts. It's just a simple message that stands alone on a page and says, "This is not for you." Now, if you are like me, you will ignore these and try to get into the book itself. So I unfortunately skipped these 2 things the first time I was reading it because I figured it was just normal before the book stuff. But as you will learn about this book, you should look at everything to get answers. The book will then give you an introduction. This is where I started the book, which honestly I'm surprised I even read this on my first go because I usually skip introductions as well, especially because it isn't very strange yet. It is a message from a man named Johnny Truant. He says he is a man who lives in LA and he is a tattoo shop apprentice. He has a friend named Luda, or Lude. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm going to say Luda because I've heard it pronounced like that before. Luda drunkenly wandered home one night to his apartment building, and because Johnny had been looking for an apartment, Luda had been paying attention to some old guy in his building named Zampano, who was so old that it wouldn't be very long before he died. Well, at 3 a.m. one morning, Luda tried to call Johnny. He said that finally Zampano had bit the big one, and to come over and to look at his apartment and see all of the stuff that he left behind. Against his better judgment, Johnny made his way there. Luda told him that he brought him over because although yes, Johnny was looking for an apartment, Zampano's death was weird. Luda found the body himself and the police are gone now. And Luda wants to show Johnny the guy's apartment because it was so weird. They got there and the first weird thing there was gashes on the floor, huge, like made by a monster. It looked like a werewolf or something clawed into the ground. Huge claw marks, which was strange. But the more strange thing was a manuscript. One that, in a note, Zampano says that anyone who finds this after his death is entitled to do whatever they want with it and profit from his work. Johnny took it and gives us one final warning. He's been editing this and has pretty much been going crazy because of it. He has been working on it so hard that he has lost sleep and almost can't think of anything else other than the manuscript. In his mind, it has been affecting him, and he feels it holds an almost supernatural power over him. And he warns us not to continue. He has been haunted by it and gets nightmares now even about it. With that warning, we should start reading the manuscript, which is where the scientific dissertation part of the book starts, which is called the Navidson Record. Finally, on page 1, we have the Navidson Record, which starts with a quote from the famous rock band, the Beatles, saying, I just saw a film and oh boy. If you don't know, the Beatles never said this. And if they did, it wasn't about House of Leaves. This is going to set a precedent from the very first sentence that not everything you read in this book is real. And there's a reason for that in-universe of the book. The first chapter talks about the movie that Zampano saw. The authenticity of the movie is highly contested and talked about. The book describes the movie a little bit, such as a hallway that is seemingly very long and a bunch of cuts with strange blood and stuff on the floor. It talks about how the movie stars and directors who have seen the movie are all confused by the authenticity and horror of it, including Harvey Weinstein saying, "It is what it is," which that quote didn't age very well. Remember, this book was written in 2000. Next chapter, we hear the beginning of the summary of the actual movie. It starts with Will Navidson, the protagonist, and his girlfriend Karen, buying a new house to refresh their relationship after a rocky streak. They have 2 kids, Chad and Daisy. Will Navidson says into the camera that he just wants to record everything for posterity's sake of his family moving into a new house. You see, Will Navidson used to be a famous photographer, and his girlfriend a model. They moved into a small house in the suburbs from the busy city. Navidson sets up a bunch of high-8 cameras to record his house like a surveillance system, just to have a project to work on for posterity. So all of the footage of the movie is from these high-8 cameras, whether they be in surveillance camera style or handheld by someone. Will Navidson asks his son what he thinks of the new house, thinking he'd get a cute answer from his young son. His son Chad gives an answer that he really doesn't like it. It's quiet, and he misses the sound of the traffic in the big city. Chad then says something strange. He says it feels like something is waiting here, which naturally sort of freaks out Will Navidson. It then says that whenever Navidson would leave his girlfriend, she would become uneasy, showing her dependence on her boyfriend. Showing even when he left the house and came back, she even visibly shows sign of relief when he gets back on camera. However, when he walks in the door, she acts like she doesn't really care, and just deadpan tells him that the water heater isn't working. This is when the book finally shows something strange. Up until this point, the book would have had footnotes and references like a normal dissertation, mostly being written by Zampano and Johnny Truant. This time, however, in a footnote about the water heater, Johnny Truant starts telling a story. In the footnotes, he just stops writing references and seemingly spews a stream of consciousness in the footnotes out of nowhere. He tells a story about he and his friend Luda went to go pick up girls in LA, where they met a bunch of girls. Luda, who is a really good barber, starts cutting their hair. Johnny then says, despite him not being great at really anything that is good to pick up girls with, other than one thing, he's really good at telling stories. They usually aren't true, but he is really good at making them up on the spot. Such interesting story that the girls can't help but be fascinated by him, so much that he can sleep with girls purely from how interesting his stories are. Luda asks Johnny to tell the girls a story while he's giving them a haircut. Obviously, the girls think it's true, but Johnny is just making things up. Johnny wants to tell the story about how he got the scars on his face. He says that he used to be an underground fighter, so good that he hardly ever lost. He said that he was once on a boat getting back to America, and as soon as he got to his destination, the captain tried to shake him down for money for taking him on a cargo boat. So, Johnny went to go make some money once he got to shore. Here, he was in an alleyway and he found a mugger, where he hurt the mugger so bad that he offered to take Johnny to this underground fight ring where he could make tons of money. And he did. Win after win. Eventually, the mugger tells Johnny to bet all of the money on himself. Johnny hesitates, but does it. He's never lost so far. But when he gets to the ring, he finds the toughest opponent he's ever fought. As it turns out, the mugger set him up. Now Johnny owed the mugger tons of money too. Luda interrupts and tells Johnny to get to the part about the birds. This is Luda's way of trying to mess with Johnny by throwing something in there that he has no idea how to fit into the story. But Johnny, being an expert storyteller as he is, says he'll get to that. Johnny, now in serious debt to the mugger, runs away, back to the captain of the boat to try to get protection. However, the captain also needs money. So Johnny and the captain come up with a plan. The mugger finds him and tells him to give him the money. Johnny says that on the ship there is cargo that was worth so much money that he was about to sell at a huge markup. And if the mugger left him alone, he'd sell it to him at a super reduced price. The mugger falls for it, and takes the crate of illegal goods. Johnny gives the money to the captain, and they're all good. Well, in that crate that the mugger bought, it wasn't illegal goods, just a bunch of birds. And that's how Johnny got all his face scars, from the fighting ring and selling the mugger a bunch of birds. The girls in Luda are fully impressed, but Johnny goes home alone, only to find his water heater isn't working. The heater in the story of Navidson just made him think of the story and he had to write it down. But not only that, the manuscript didn't even say water heater. It just said heater. So Johnny just forged that part into the story, for seemingly no reason. You might be wondering why I even mentioned this whole part of the book. Well, it's very important, as it establishes a truth that has to be understood about the rest of the book. Two things, actually. Number one, Johnny is a gifted liar. He can lie and tell stories and you'd never even know if he was telling the truth. And number two, Johnny isn't afraid to derail the main point of the manuscript. And not only that, he's not even afraid to change it just to randomly tell you about his day. You'll see this more in the next chapter, whereas the Navidson Record is talking about Will Navidson's parents and things, Johnny is in the footnotes talking about how he was trying to pick up girls with Luda and how he was making up stories about the massive scars on his forearms now. In chapter 4, the book really picks up. Will Navidson and his family go to a wedding on the West Coast, and seemingly has a very strained time there. But when they all get back to their house, their whole world changes. The house has seemingly changed. You'd expect something huge and horrific due to this being kind of a horror book, but instead of that, it's something small and seemingly insignificant. This, however, I believe makes it a lot more disturbing, because it could have come out and said, the whole house was trashed and there was ghosts everywhere and blood on the ceiling, but it doesn't say that. The only thing that was changed about the house is that there's an extra door. There was seemingly an intruder, and for some reason, nothing was stolen, but there's an extra closet in the house. One that was not there before they left for the West Coast. Inside, there's nothing, just an empty room. But seemingly, someone broke into the Navidson house and installed an extra closet. Why? What was the point? This isn't the only strange thing, though. The closet is seemingly impossible. The closet is seemingly longer than the outside of the house would allow. There should not be enough space on the outside of the house to allow how long the closet is. So, Will Navidson measures this to check his work. Once, twice, 3 times, every time the closet is just a little bit too long to fit in the outside of the house. Will doesn't trust himself. He's a photographer after all, not a handyman. So he calls his brother, who's a carpenter. It's Will's fraternal twin, Tom. Tom and Will's relationship has been strained for some time, but he trusts his brother enough and is desperate enough to call him. Or they have a couple wholesome moments and they make up a little. And Tom gets to measuring. Tom gets the same result. It would be one thing if only Will got the result. He could have just been crazy or measured it wrong or had a bad ruler or whatever. But a carpenter whose job involves this kind of thing got the same result. Will, now more freaked out than ever, called a college professor that he knew, a man named Billy Reston. The way these two met was one of Will Navidson's most famous photos. It was when Reston was struck by a falling telephone pole in India, paralyzing him. Will's photo was the moment he got paralyzed. Reston keeps this photo close at all times. Reston comes down to the house and says that not only was this too long to fit in the house, it was longer than even Navidson had originally thought. Karen, who had been seemingly trying to ignore it, screams as the hallway seemingly grows. In the footnotes, Johnny is doing what he does best, talking about himself. However, just like an echo of the Navidson Record, some strange happenings have been happening in Johnny's life now too. As we discussed earlier, Johnny is a tattoo artist, or at the very least he works in a tattoo shop. He was looking at some tattoo ink one day, and as he was looking at the blacks, the blues, the reds, the purples, he felt something very strange. He said he felt something staring at him, a very noticeable feeling of someone staring right at him. The air feels heavy and he feels very sick for seemingly no reason. He gets up to get a drink of water, and to be alone for a second. And that's when he walks out into the hallway and realizes he's made a huge mistake. He's now alone. He gets paralyzed by the feeling of something right behind him. He feels the hot breath on his neck, and he feels the unmistakable feeling of killing intent right behind him. He whips his head around to see nothing. Nothing is there. The feeling starts to go away. He freaks out for a second because what was that? He had felt her standing right behind him, with such intent for violence it was palpable in the air. But now she was gone. But how did he know the thing he felt was a woman? Had he been thinking of a woman? He snaps out of it. He later finds a passage that confuses him while editing the Navidson Record. He finds one of the women that helped Zampano when he was writing and asked her about it. He and this woman get to talking and they end up having sex and a threesome with another one of her friends. During this whole ordeal of the threesome, Johnny remembers his father, for seemingly no reason at all. He remembers him and how he loved to fly. He was a pilot for a short time, but eventually he was a truck driver. And he remembers how his father was killed in an instant when a drunk driver made him swerve off the road, ending his life instantly and without ceremony. He thought about his father some more and then went back to making love with the two women, confused of why he thought of his father and his death. Chapter 5 is a strange chapter, as for some reason the Navidson Record goes somewhere completely strange and starts talking about echoes. The idea of them, where the term comes from, the Greek story of echo, and in the moment it seems like a weird reprieve from the story of Will Navidson and Johnny. Like someone just got sidetracked while writing it, but it will eventually make sense. In the footnotes, Johnny has similar feelings to us, wondering why Zampano wrote this chapter and why he added some strange poetic sounding paragraphs near the end. But then, like Zampano, Johnny gets sidetracked. He starts talking about another encounter with this monster he's been feeling that has been watching him. He and Luda went to a bar recently and they were just having drinks like normal, looking for girls to pick up, when Johnny gets this feeling. About Zampano and this chapter no less. He tells Luda about these weird feelings and how the claws made of bone that he felt made those marks on Zampano's house when they found the manuscript. Luda laughs at him and tells him claws aren't made of bone. Johnny laughs and then he breaks out into this super strange run-on paragraph that seemingly makes no sense. But it was loud there, and the crowd kept both of us from hearing correctly. And while I wanted to believe Luda's basics, I couldn't. There was something just so awful about the old man's utterance. I felt a terrible empathy for him then, living in that tiny place permeated with the odor of age, useless blinks against the darkness. His word, my word, maybe even your word added to this, and ringing inside me like some awful dream over and over again, modulating slightly, slowly pitching my own defenses into something entirely different, until the music of the reoccurrence drew into the relief of my own scars drawn long ago, over 2 decades ago, and with more than a claw, a stiletto, or even ancient Samuel O'Reilly 1891. And these scars torn, ripped, bleeding, stuttering, for they are the first of all his scars, the kind only bars of an EKG can accurately remember, a more precise if incomplete history, Q waves deflecting downward at what must be considered the commencement of the QRS complex, telling the story of the past infraction, that awful endurance and eventual letting go, the failure which began it all in the first place, probably right after the burning maze, but still years ahead of the other loss, a horrible violence before the coming of the great whale. It goes on like this. This weird run-on paragraph is interrupted when Luda asks him if he's okay. He must have spaced out and had this whole thought that seemingly makes no sense. Johnny then talks about a woman that's been coming into the tattoo shop recently, and he is obsessed with her. Not like the meaningless sex he's been having with all these random Hollywood girls, but this woman really made him freeze. He could hardly talk to her, he didn't even know her name, but he calls her a thumper due to a tattoo that is on her. He can hardly even think straight around her, and it almost makes him forget about Zampano and the Navidson Record. Time passes, and Will Navidson, Tom, Reston, and the rest cannot figure out how this even makes sense. The hallway is longer than the house. Months go by, and the issue remains unresolved. One day, the kids end up missing. Neither parent notices as they are having a fight and not talking. Chad and Daisy are playing, and it breaks out into a fight. Both parents notice at the same time and try to find them. They look all over and realize there's only one place they haven't checked. The impossible closet. They figure this out due to an echo they hear of the screams of the children. Nowhere in the house has an echo, other than that hallway. They open up the door only to find the hallway is now dark. It's so dark they can't even see how long it is now. Will runs in. Karen stays outside due to a crippling fear of claustrophobia. Karen waits for them. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. 5.5 minutes later, Will Navidson brings both children out in his arms. The hallway has now grown so long that it took 5.5 minutes to traverse the whole distance and back. Probably close to half a mile long. Karen and Will Navidson make up, and she makes him promise never to go in that hallway again. She just wants to forget about the impossible closet and live a normal life. Navidson agrees. A couple of weeks pass, and Tom comes back to construct a lock on the door in the closet. They wouldn't want the kids to go back in there. Later still, Will invites a famous person whose name is omitted from the manuscript, and has dinner with them in their house. Being bored, Will Navidson, wanting to show his guests something cool, shows him the closet, much to Karen's chagrin. Karen gets furious with Will and makes him sleep on the couch at night. Well, as anyone who's ever slept on a couch will tell you, it's hard to sleep on one. Will isn't able to sleep, and in the early hours of the morning, he takes a high-8 camera and goes back into the hallway. Here's one of the first strange oddities of the way the book itself is written. The book explains how well shot the expedition into the hallway is when Navidson is filming, using classic photography tricks. In the footnotes, Zampano then cites hundreds of photographers, thousands maybe, pages worth of just photographer names. Johnny then corrects this to say that not all of these are even photographers, and they're seemingly random and perhaps some sort of metaphor of how the manuscript made Zampano and him go crazy. The book then continues as normal, saying Navidson goes into the hallway alone. He walks down it, only to find it now turns. This makes no sense. This hallway is at least a mile long now. There is seemingly no reason it could fit in his normal suburban house. It turns again, almost pitch black and cold, until after a while he gets to a new part of this impossible structure within his own house. A huge foyer with ceilings at least a mile high, all pitch black. He decides to turn back now, only to hear a growl. He's not alone in here. He panics and looks around and realizes that the way he went in has changed. The hallway has shifted yet again, but not only grown longer, but its walls are now a maze. He panics, thinking he'll die in this labyrinth until he does something incredibly smart that I would never have thought of. He uses his voice. His echoes find his way back to the beginning. He would follow them to where the echoes got less and less frequent until he found his way back to his daughter waiting for him in the early hours of the morning. Johnny returns to tell us about his awful day in the footnotes. He was having such a great morning. When he gets to the shop, his boss tells him his drawing sucks, so he'll never be an artist. However, Johnny is so good at the work he does around the tattoo shop, like refilling ink, making needles, and so on, that his boss wants to keep him for the job. No one can pack needles like Johnny can. So he gets to work, refilling inks, blacks, blues, reds, purples, then it happens again. He feels it. This time it's human. Is it human? Does it matter? No. It's here. The killing intent feeling is back. The monster has long fingers. It makes a sucking noise on its teeth. How does Johnny know this without seeing this? He doesn't know. The door slams shut behind him. He can't see anything but shadows. He shits and pisses himself. He can't figure out why. He hears a howl. Then everything stops making sense. He can't breathe. He can't even comprehend what's happening to him. He recalls the words, known some call is am? What do those words mean? Why does he think of them? All of a sudden he's back. He hasn't pissed or shit himself. Nothing's wrong. He's walking through the door that slammed shut. Why was that? Why did he just feel all of that happened? He stubs his toe while distracted and falls down the stairs. Knocks the air out of himself, but more or less he's fine. He then realizes what those words meant then. Known some call is am. Non sum qualum es am, which means I am not what I used to be, in Latin. Chapter 6 is quite short and talks about the animals of the house and how they cannot interact with this impossible closet, or the labyrinth as I will now call it. But it just says how they pretty much teleport out of the house once they go into the closet. Strange that not much time is spent on this subject though. In the footnotes, Johnny agrees. He will then do his usual thing and talk about the tattoo shop and how Thumper came in today, and she gave him his number after calling him cute. This will make Johnny very happy, and while he thinks about calling her, he goes into one of those long paragraphs where he doesn't make sense, and it's a huge run-on thing. I think these are some sort of anxiety attacks. As someone who gets bad anxiety and panic attacks, it does a good job of putting the feelings into words. It's hard to follow, and it makes you just confused. It makes you almost have to read and then reread what Johnny says over and over because you can't focus on what he's saying. It's almost like you want to skip over those paragraphs because of how confusing they are. But you shouldn't. To understand Johnny, you should read these, as he can't skip through these things in his head, so you shouldn't either. Go with the anxiety and panic with him, and just listen to him. He will then say how Zampano probably had this monster follow him too, only now Zampano is gone. Everything that was Zampano is gone, and the monster is hungry. This chapter involves the final main characters of the Navidson part of the book being introduced. Holloway, which coincidentally is the name of my high school weed dealer. Holloway was called because of Karen's hesitation of letting Will Navidson go back into the labyrinth. Holloway is a semi-famous explorer, sort of like Bear Grylls if he was less famous and didn't drink pee. He and his team of Jed and Wax have explored all kind of things together. Caves, uncharted territories, etc. So through some connections, Holloway learned of this place, not really believing in it at first. Will shows him and his team the labyrinth's entrance, and Holloway then believes him. At first, Will Navidson and Holloway hate each other, but when the idea of fame and fortune come up for being the people that discovered and explored this place, well, that's where they agreed. The first time Holloway enters the labyrinth, it's mostly uneventful. They go in and confirm what Navidson has already said. Impossible hallway, impossible geometry that doesn't make sense, like taking several lefts in a row and not ending back up where they started, as well as a giant foyer that Navidson found. That's when they hear the same growl Navidson did, and once again, with that growl, the layout of the labyrinth changed. Only these guys came prepared with a spool of fishing line to make their way back, safe and unharmed. The next time Holloway enters the labyrinth was the day after the first, this time with a little bit longer of fishing lines and flares and neon markers to mark the walls. They go further in and find what seems to be the exact center of the entire labyrinth, a giant spiral staircase down, seemingly infinitely deep. They hear the growl again, but once again, it didn't really matter that the layout changed because they had the fishing line. They head back after getting some samples of the wall, and then Will expresses interest in going in himself, only for Karen to seemingly get irrationally angry about it. She says that Will has been all over the world in his youth. It's time he settles down and lives with his family. Karen wants to grow old with Will, not lose him to some weird supernatural labyrinth. Soon, the third trip of Holloway's into the labyrinth begins. This time, they bring tons of supplies to go down the staircase. They get there only to spend 7 hours going down it, when they realize they have to turn back. It took them 11 hours to climb back out of it, however. The diameter of the staircase was growing. And at the end of the expedition, Zampano writes something in German. Johnny, in the footnotes, says that Luda knows a girl that could read German. Coincidentally, it was someone Johnny already knew. An attractive blonde woman he tried to hit on in the past, only for her boyfriend to almost kill Johnny. But it ended without incident. Johnny, being surprised that he knew this girl, agrees to meet with her, Kyrie. Then they end up flirting despite her having a boyfriend because he was in a place called Gdansk in Poland. They had a fun time driving at high speeds through the desert, and before they knew it, they were having sex again. When Kyrie went to drop Johnny off, she starts crying, saying that the Gdansk man didn't even love her or have sex with her or anything, and she was depressed after having such a good time with Johnny. By the time she left, Johnny forgot to even ask about the German. So Johnny wrote this footnote for no reason. In the next expedition Holloway was gearing up for, he had to bring with him both a gun and a compass. Karen went to get a compass from a store. A compass store, probably. To come back to find that not only did the compass not work in the labyrinth, but it didn't even work in the house itself. Right before the expedition, Holloway loads his rifle to everyone's dismay. He says that whatever's growling in there might attack them, so this is for safety. Just then, Wax, Holloway's boy, finds Karen. We know this because of the high-8 cameras all over the house. They flirt, and eventually Karen ends up kissing him, effectively cheating on Will Navidson. Of course, Navidson didn't know this at the time and only found out months later, which we'll talk about. However, this was the last time that the family and Holloway were all seen together in one piece. In the footnotes, Johnny talks about that after his father died, he ended up in several foster homes, usually fighting people at school only to get moved to a different foster home, until he met Raymond, a Marine that had taken him in and didn't take kindly to his shit. Raymond told Johnny that if he got in another fight, there was going to be problems. Well, Johnny being Johnny, the very next day he got into a huge fight, one that got him expelled. He got home and Raymond told him to get in the car. They were going to go to the hospital for the wounds Johnny suffered. But before they did, Raymond took him out to where no one could hear him scream and gave him some of the scars that he has on his face and broke his tooth. Chapter 8 is called S.O.S, at least in the chapter names section of the book, and this is where things start to go off the rails a bit. In the Navidson Record part of the story, it says that after Holloway's team goes in, the whole family waits a long time on the outside. Just waiting. Doing nothing. They wait and wait and wait, nothing. Until after a certain amount of time, they hear something. 3 short knocks, then 3 long knocks, and then 3 more short knocks. If you know Morse code, you know this is an SOS. In other words, a cry for help. They can't find where the knocks are even coming from. After all, where in the house are they really? Where is the labyrinth in the house at all? Curiously, in the movie that the book is describing, It says that the editing of the movie is even an SOS. 3 short shots, then 3 long, and then 3 short shots again. Johnny has a little bit of an interesting revelation in the footnotes. He says that he was at his job, and now his boss is sort of tiptoeing around him after the incident with the panic attacks and such, but Thumper was there too. Johnny did what he always did and tried to impress women, and he told some stories. He told some stories, and Thumper actually listened to him and said that he was alright. Johnny worked up the nerve to go with her to a Thai restaurant, where he told stories with her and laughed, until he did something strange. He told the truth. He talked about Zampano and the attacks and what's really been going on with him. Now no one was laughing. Thumper was just listening to him intently, with focus, and Johnny felt heard. For the first time, he didn't have to tell a story. He was on another tirade with a run-on paragraph, but Thumper just listens. It's possible he had a small attack here, and Thumper just listened to him and stayed with him. Only when it was all over, Johnny realized he was about to cry, which is something he hadn't done since he was 12. He then changes the subject. Chapter 9 may be the most important chapter to understand the book, I feel. When you read it the first time, it's a lot like the chapter about echoes at first. Seemingly nonsensical, but in actuality it's very important. And once you finish the book, this chapter is something like a key. Something that unlocks something in your brain. It is a long chapter though, so get ready. It starts with a footnote this time, which is strange. But Johnny has something to say, of course. He says that he was going to talk to another girl about Zampano's script for something. He was nervous and panicky to leave the house to meet this girl, but he pushed through it and left. On the way there, he starts feeling that feeling. The panic. Just as soon as he felt it, a car veered off the road and explodes on him. Fire everywhere, destruction all around, until it wasn't. No car crash, nothing happened. He hallucinated it. He then tells a story about his sex life, because of course he does. The book then starts talking about the history of labyrinths. It talks about a bunch of stuff that doesn't really matter too much until you get to some red crossed out text. Which is strange because the book is mostly in black and white, except for the word house, which we will get to later. It sort of stands out. This red text, Johnny says, is something Zampano tried to cross out or get rid of, but Johnny managed to salvage it. The red text talks about the myth of the Minotaur the labyrinth. You know the myth. Daedalus made the labyrinth to hold the Minotaur for the king. It's a famous Greek legend. Zampano strangely chimes in and says he has a theory about this story. Zampano says that the labyrinth was made to hold a Minotaur, that's true, but the Minotaur was actually the illegitimate, super disfigured son of the king. The king didn't want to just kill the Minotaur because in some way deep down he loved his son, but he couldn't always be seen with this monster. He was a king. So he made this labyrinth and spread a rumor that there was a man-eating horrible monster in it so no one would go in to see the king's disfigured son. The hero, Theseus, who was in fact no hero but just some drunk guy that stumbled in, and killed the defenseless Minotaur. The king, horribly saddened by the death of his son, had to keep up appearances and named Theseus a hero. But deep down, he was heartbroken that his son was killed. Able to be mad at no one but himself as he put his son there in the first place. If you're reading the book for the first time, like I did, you might think that the story here is to say that the monster in the house, in the labyrinth, is in fact a Minotaur. However, it doesn't mean that. It means something else entirely, but I won't spoil the analysis at the end of the video, so we'll just leave this here for now. We then get to read about what led up to the S.O.S message in the last chapter. We get to see how the expedition went wrong. Holloway's team made their way to where they left off in the last expedition, only this time instead of 7 hours to get to that point, it took them 3 days and nights. The labyrinth was changing, but you knew that already. When they get down the staircase, they roam for hours. Jed and Wax ask Holloway if he knows where he's going. Holloway gets frustrated, of course, and naturally he destroys a hole in the wall in anger, only to decide that the other side is more labyrinth. Here the book starts to change. The book has a hole in it, literally now, because of what Holloway did. You can see it here on this page and for the next 20 or so pages. There's a literal hole in these pages, where you can just see more text. So not only did Holloway make a hole in the labyrinth just to find more rooms, but the book echoes it. There was a hole in the pages to only have more text. They realize that they now have about half of their supplies left, so they start making their way back. There is a problem, however. Once again, the labyrinth has grown. The staircase now is much further away. They no longer have enough supplies to make it back. Tensions have just been raised to the max. They have to try and make it back anyway. What else can they do? Days pass and they still seemingly don't have the food to keep going much longer. Just then they find one of their neon markers, only to find that it has been ripped apart by some huge claw, along with the rations they left for emergencies, which has also been torn apart. Tensions were already high, and this almost makes everyone snap. Holloway especially. He pulls out the gun and loads it. Jed and Wax are concerned, but Holloway says that he thinks the monster or the Minotaur is close by. Just then they hear the growl again. Holloway strangely doesn't get scared, but instead excited. Jed and Wax follow for a while, but are taken aback by how Holloway is acting. There is no reason to hunt this monster. They should just continue up the staircase and try to get out. They have an argument, and frustrated with Holloway, Jed and Wax leave him. They don't abandon him, however. They just wind up a bit up the staircase. Time passes, longer and longer. The two get concerned and call out Holloway's name for a bit, and after a while they have no choice but to continue up the staircase without him. If he was dead, they at least had to get out. So they continue. Miraculously, the next checkpoint that they set up had not been touched by the Minotaur. There is even some food and water. Relieved, they start eating and drinking to replenish their strength. They could make it. Finally, when Wax goes to take a sip of water, a crack rings out. A bullet enters Wax's arm. Holloway rushes over. Everyone is terrified. Holloway just shot Wax. He freaks out and says that it was an accident. He thought Wax was the Minotaur. They all freak out and Holloway starts to just walk away. Jed and Wax are rightly freaking out, yelling at Holloway, telling him to help him patch him up as best as possible so they can still make it if he helps them. Holloway says he can't stay. He can't go back now. He just shot someone. They'll tell on him and he'll get arrested. They tell him that that's crazy and just to help them. Holloway runs away and disappears into the darkness of the labyrinth. Jed tries to pull Wax up the staircase as best he can, alone, but not long after Holloway left them, two cracks ring out in the labyrinth. Holloway is now hunting them both down. Jed manages to get to Wax to relative safely by losing Holloway somehow, but now they're lost. No markers, no caches of food or supplies. They don't even know how to get back to the staircase, let alone get back to the house. Here, in a last-ditch attempt to be saved, Jed knocks on the floor. That's when they hear the 3 short, 3 long, and 3 short again. Johnny then chimes in, of course. He says that despite him working at a tattoo shop and being an apprentice of sorts, he doesn't have any tattoos. Just scars up and down his arms. Which, in my opinion, is very weird, because every tattoo shop I've been in, every single person in there has tattoos. The artists, the apprentices, even the front desk people. But I digress. He says that he once met a ghost in a dining hall at school. All he heard was a sigh in his name. Johnny. Just that. He said he'd remembered that, though it had almost nothing to do with anything. He finally met a girl, Ashley, one of the girls who worked with Zampano. They met and Ashley said that they actually had met before. Johnny, not remembering and feeling guilty, just went along with it. They had sex because, of course, this is Johnny Truant. Of course he did. And then Ashley said that she was engaged, but she had to do this just once with him for old time's sake. She wanted to ever since she met him in Texas. Johnny can only muster up a few words in response. I've never been to Texas. The book then starts to break apart even more. The words shift around more and more. Blank spots appear all over the page. Lots of white space. Johnny says more about some panic attacks, as well as he talks about hooking up with some girl named Haley. Only then does Johnny realize what the book is doing to him. After he talks about sex, because of course he does, when he went to sleep and woke up, Haley was gone. Only later on does Johnny hear from Haley again, but she doesn't contact him. He hears her on the radio. Haley recounts meeting this weird guy, where she went to this place and he had pages all over the walls with writings and drawings all over. She said that this guy she was with screamed in his sleep, and in those screams he said stuff about mutilation and monsters, and it really scared her. The guy was normal enough, but the drawings and pages all over, as well as the horrible screaming in his sleep, scared her. This man was named Johnny. Johnny then really understood how crazy he sounds. He knew what the writing was doing to him, but he didn't know to what extent, until right now. The chapter ends with a footnote that the editors of the book wanted to add, not Johnny. It was a letter that they wanted to add to the book after it had already been circulated for a bit. It was from Haley. She wanted to say that Johnny wasn't a bad guy, she just wanted to know whatever happened to him, because at the time of writing, no one had heard from Johnny. When I read this, I thought to myself, this would be a really cool place to end Johnny's story. Like him talking about all these horrible things and monsters, this Minotaur, and then he just disappears. It would be a cool horror story, if we never knew the answers of what this book was or what the monster was. But by the end of the book, I'm glad it didn't end here. In the beginning of chapter 10, we are back in present time after everyone hears the S.O.S. in the house. Reston, Tom, and Will Navidson get ready to enter the labyrinth themselves to go rescue Holloway's expedition. Rustin and Tom are a bit scared, but Will Navidson seems almost happy, like he wants to go into the labyrinth, to Karen's chagrin. As they head in, the book tells us for a second time that some experts who have seen this film believe that the labyrinth changes based on the person's mental state. I didn't mention this before because it hardly mattered before, but it does now. These experts believe that the labyrinth grows and changes when someone's mindset does. If you go back to all the times that the growl was heard or when things had changed, there does seem to be a connection. Anyway, Rustin, Tom, and Will Navidson go into the labyrinth until they get to the spiral staircase. Here, Tom realizes he cannot go any further. He is out of breath and in no condition to keep going. Rustin, despite being in a wheelchair, continues down the staircase with Will Navidson. Around here in the footnotes, Johnny says that after he heard Haley on the radio, he has gotten even worse. He wakes up with a sore throat from screaming in his sleep and he's scared and exhausted. He went to a doctor and got prescribed some medicine that cost him a bunch of money, more than he could even afford to buy. He went around selling old CDs he had laying around as well as other things to pay for it. He needs to sleep, but he fears the drugs are making him less attentive, and he's scared that the Minotaur will get him because of his senses being dulled. So after he buys all the pills, he crushes them and pours them down the drain. All of that for nothing. To prepare for the Minotaur, he says he's going to go buy a gun. Speaking of which, he hears fireworks and realizes that the date is the 4th of July, meaning he forgot his own birthday. He's been so deep in this psychosis, he forgot his own birthday. The book then switches back to the Navidson Record. Navidson and Rustin are following the markers and seemingly moving just on instinct, when they hear something. A whimper. Miraculously, from this whimper, they find Jed and Wax. Everyone is relieved, and then it goes into detail about something strange. It talks about the individual frames of the next part of the movie, as in, between two frames, the life ends. A thunderous crack flies through the air and a bullet flies into Jed's head. In between two frames of the movie, a life comes to an end. Now the only survivors are Rustin, Will Navidson, and Wax bleeding out from the bullet wound in his arm. Jed was just shot in the head by Holloway and killed. By this point in the book, there are maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs on a single page only, but when the book is talking about life ending between 2 frames, there is just 2 words on the page and a huge space in the middle, perhaps referencing the absence of life between the 2 frames. Rustin and Will Navidson return fire and point the camera in the direction to see the muzzle flashes lighting up Holloway's body. They drag Wax away and rush through corridor after corridor of the maze, slamming doors behind them, now thoroughly lost while running from Holloway. Chapter 11 is mostly about Tom and Will Navidson. Remember, they are twins and used to be very close, and this house has also brought them together once again. The beginning of this chapter is talking about how several experts correlate Tom and Will to the biblical story of Jacob and Esau, which compares them to a deceptive, clean, and shepherd brother, Jacob, and a rough around the edges yet lovable brother, Esau. In the biblical story, Esau attempts to kill Jacob due to his deception, but after 20 years, Jacob, who had run away from his murderous brother, comes back to his brother, and Esau forgives him. The story then questions which twin is which in this allegory. After this, it said that Zampano originally had a whole part of this book about brothers, perhaps even Zampano's brother, but it was all completely scrapped, unsalvageable due to it being too personal. The book then transitions to a transcript of Tom's logs while his twin and Rustin are out looking for Jed and Wax. Some of his logs are funny, talking about a story with a captain who shits his pants, a dwarf who has sex with a penguin, as well as him asking the monster in the labyrinth to be gentle to him. Then comes the most important part of the footnotes by Johnny. Seemingly out of nowhere, he tells a story about a dog he once had, a Pekingese, which I actually used to have one of those when I was a baby. But he says that once him and Luda were out at a bar, and a girl who was well endowed was in this bar with them. Johnny awkwardly talks to her and finds out her name, which is strangely also Johnny, but spelled like this, and not like our Johnny, who is spelled like this. They were walking home when they see a dirty lost dog, a Pekingese. They dote over it for a while, and Johnny, our Johnny, says he will take it home. It looks so lost and alone and dirty, and he feels awful for it. He picks up the Pekingese and wipes the dirt and snot off the poor thing's face. He decides he's going to take it home, but she wants it instead, saying that she has a big open yard and our Johnny only has a studio apartment. The dog would be much happier with her. He eventually agrees. She eventually gives him a lift home, and on the way, he starts to feel uneasy. She seems off, unnatural. She's staring blankly and just looks so fake when he thinks about it. She seems so off, but he ignores it and wishes her well, and she smiles at him when she leaves. However, this smile is feeling so unnatural to him as she drives off. As he turns to go to his door, he hears a wet and disgusting loud thump. He gets scared and runs down the street to see it. Johnny, the female Johnny, had thrown the Pekingese out of the window. It now lay dead on the pavement, head caved in. It must have taken an incredible amount of force to do that much damage to the poor dog's skull. She must have really hated the dog to do that. The dog was dead, no doubt about it. Johnny just stood there, looking at it. His poor Pekingese. He tried to think of a name for it as it died, but going through his head, he couldn't think of one. He just stood there with the body for a long time. He eventually just had to walk away. Johnny's poor Pekingese. At the end of the chapter, it continues with the transcript from Tom's story. He gets a call on his walkie-talkie from Will. Will needs help, and Will fills him in on what's going on with Jed's death and Wax being injured and Holloway being on a killing spree. He needs Tom to go down the stairs and help him. Tom can't do it though. He's too scared and he's in no condition to do so. He starts to freak out and he concludes that the monster is now near him. He cannot help Will by going down the stairs, but Tom has an idea. We get back to Rustin and Will after a long time of pulling Wax up the stairs. They are bruised and blistered. The only thing on these pages are on the very bottom. Maybe one paragraph on the bottom of the page. It then talks about Tom and how he's throwing down a rope. When it talks about Tom, however, the paragraphs are at the top of the page, showing where the two are. Tom at the top, and Will and Rustin at the bottom. Now, Tom is a big guy, so he can pull up Wax and Rustin's wheelchair, and then he starts to pull Rustin up, slowly. Until, for some reason, Rustin flies up really fast. The words reverse and go up the page, as you can see here. With this knowledge, that the page shows what's happening itself without using words, but where the words are, the words reverse and flying up the page, so we can infer that gravity has been switched in the center of the spiral staircase. Will Navidson is now alone, unable to use the rope to get up, as Tom can no longer throw the rope down. Will Navidson is now in total darkness, alone, with no way up. Johnny, in the footnotes, is talking about how he does nothing now. He just counts the days. He went to work the other day and says his boss, who usually hates him, and Johnny hates him too, but his boss is now concerned about him because he looks awful. His boss thinks he's on meth or something, which with how he looks and has been acting is a fair guess. He then goes into one of his super run-on long paragraphs that makes no sense, but it's not just a paragraph now. It's 3 or 4 pages of this weird run-on paragraph, saying so much, but at the same time saying nothing at all. Back in the Navidson Record, Will waits where he is, for an hour or so, hoping somehow Tom will figure something out and drop another rope or something, but nothing ever comes. He's got maybe 3 days worth of food and water, but nothing else. His high 8 is running out of film too. This is looking like the end of Will Navidson. We return to the house with Tom, Rustin, and Wax. Tom explains to a terrified Karen about Will and how he is super far down and more than likely unsavable. All while the kids are talking to Wax, who's begging for water. Tom, Rustin, and Karen are all mourning the loss of Will, while Karen is almost blaming the two for not bringing him back. Tom then goes to mourn on his own with a joint and some alcohol, which he previously was sober from alcohol for a long time. Karen heads to the living room and just waits for Will, who has no way of getting home from the staircase. She waits and waits until the early hours of the morning, when miraculously, Will enters the house once more from the labyrinth. Will wakes up Karen, who cries out in joy. However, before Will can even tell his story about how he got up the stairs and found Holloway's gear, she tells him that she's leaving for New York, more than likely insinuating that if he doesn't come with her, she's leaving him. Right then and right there, right after she finds out he's alive. In the footnotes, Johnny says that Luda comes over to his place in September, and it's been a while since he's seen him. Months, in fact. Luda is surprised by how bad Johnny looks, how bad his apartment looks. He tells Johnny to just throw away the book. It's killing him. One look at his apartment and you know that. Thousands of black drawings of nothing, as well as no electricity anymore due to unpaid bills. Candle wax all over the floor and papers everywhere. Luda tells him to throw it away. It will kill him if he doesn't. Then he leaves. Johnny considers he's right, and then thinks that without him, the Navidson Record would die. Then he wonders if maybe it's the other way around. Maybe without the Navidson Record, Johnny would die. He then reminisces on why he tells stories so much. He remembers the truth has never gotten him anywhere, and he started making up lies since Raymond, his foster father, beat him so badly. He lied to everyone and said that it wasn't Raymond who messed him up so bad, but just more schoolyard fights. He would lie to Raymond about things and stay on his good side after the beatings, and before he knew it, he was telling full-fledged stories like it was nothing. He then realizes he cannot throw away the Navidson Record, because it is who he is now. The movie of the Navidson Record then cuts to the last moments of Holloway's tapes. It shows Holloway's last moments of terror and uncertainty. He knows he shot those two people. He wasn't so far gone that he didn't know that. He also says that he can hear the Minotaur close. It's growling and watching Holloway, and he knows it, but it's not attacking. Why is it not attacking? Holloway's on edge. He doesn't understand why it's not attacking him, and he spirals further and further. Zampano reflects that Holloway and Tom were in similar positions, but where Holloway had a gun, Tom was joking around and trying to keep it light to keep himself in an okay mood. And strangely, that offered way more protection than a gun ever could, giving more credence to the fact that the labyrinth may be based on how the person who's in its mental state is going. Then the final part of Holloway's tapes are shown. He hears a monster coming closer and closer, and he swears at it. And then we hear him groan and choke on his own blood. The footnotes mention that this is the biggest debate of the whole Navidson Record, if there actually even was a monster, or if Holloway shot himself. It's never really seen, nor is it ever even really hinted at killing anyone but Holloway. Everyone that dies on the Navidson Record does not die directly from the Minotaur except for Holloway, so that begs the question. Did the Minotaur actually kill Holloway, or did he end his own life? Or a secret third option? Does it even matter? There's also tons of red crossed out texts about Minotaurs and labyrinths around here. Then Johnny says that he can't help but picture Zampano really writing this. Then he says something strange. He says he can feel Zampano. Not like in a poetic sense, but a literal one. Zampano is inside me, he says. He says he thinks of Zampano as just an old man, just a fading soul, but he's more than that. This is another major clue to one of my theories, but more on that after we finish the summary. Back in the Navidson Record, everything seems okay. Will gets Tom off the floor as he's drunk on the floor, but with his brother back, he's in a better mood and cracking jokes now. Things seem back to normal, except for the dead Jed, as well as shot Wax and Holloway either ending his own life or dying to a mythical creature in a labyrinth, but either way, back to normal. Until it happens. Rustin hears something behind the now locked labyrinth door, like a grinding or stone scraping on stone. Karen then screams. Something happened. Navidson has not eaten in 2 days, as well as he is super dehydrated, but all he needed to hear was Karen scream one time and Navidson springs into action. While Karen was packing, the wall of the bedroom behind her disappears, now an entrance once again to the labyrinth. The ceiling also does the same. The bed is now cut in half too. The house is fighting back from them leaving. The children then scream as well. Navidson rushes into the house. The hallway's gravity is flipped 90 degrees into the labyrinth at the bottom. Navidson slides down the now flipping hallway and manages to grab a loose doorknob and save himself. He also manages to save Rustin and get out of the house, finally. However, Tom is missing, as well as the kids. Chad is found safe outside, but just as that happens, they hear Daisy scream. Navidson once again rushes back into the house, only to find Tom saving Daisy. Tom throws her out of a window to get her to safety, and then Tom continues to try to outrun the labyrinth, which is now rapidly sucking up the whole house. When Tom's drinking and smoking finally catch up to him, he clutches his own sides and falls to his knees. Will Navidson screams for his brother. Tom then gets up, and then once again falls. Tom realizing now the futility. "Oh Christ," Tom says, and then once again, between two frames of footage, a life is ended. Tom is sucked up into the labyrinth, never to be seen again. This was the only death that made me kind of sad, as I like Tom, probably one of my favorite characters other than Johnny, who is suspiciously quiet in the footnotes at this rather important juncture of the book. Chapter 14 is a pretty short one, however once again a very important one. It talks about how Karen went back to New York and Will Navidson went to sort his brother's things after his death and they all escaped the house. Will promises to join Karen and kids as soon as he finishes up with Tom's stuff, though as soon as he did, he went right back to Charlottesville where the house is. Karen cheats on Will a second time here, due to him lying about joining her, as well as his inability to let go of the house. Though she doesn't do it to find some emotional connection to leave Will, she does it because she's in pain, and wants Will to be who she wants him to be. No excuse to cheat, but it's a reason, I suppose. We understand she is very much in love with Will Navidson. However, every single night she watches the tapes that Will sent her. Johnny says in the footnotes that the girl he slept with, the one with the boyfriend in Gdansk, had the Gdansk man come back and corner Luda in a club in Hollywood. He's mad about Johnny sleeping with her, and Luda is a part of that because he introduced them. And since Johnny is a recluse at this point, the only way to get to Johnny is through Luda. Luda, being the resourceful tactician that he is, after being cornered by the Gdansk man in the club, kicks him in the balls. Then he has security, who he knew on a personal level, kick the Gdansk man out of the club. Johnny then talks about letters, like the kind you'd send to someone or receive in the mail. He says that most people have a letter or two that they have saved and it's personal. I know I do. He mentions that he has one or two that he got from his mother. She used to keep it in this horribly ugly locket she would keep around her neck for years after he sent them. She left it to him after she died, and he never flipped the latch on the locket for some reason until recently. He doesn't know why, but inside he found a letter. One that he had written to her when he was 11 years old. She kept it from the day she got it until the day she died, in this locket near her heart. On your first read, you might think this is one of the first times, if not the first time, Johnny even mentions his mother, here on page 350. The thing is, without spoiling too much, that's not true. This chapter is more important than you know. Chapter 15 mostly talks about Karen. She sits on a park bench giving an interview, and she talks about how the already existing footage of the Navidson house has been made into a short reel and distributed before the full movie of the Navidson Record comes out. It's mostly critics talking about the house and what it means and what it represents, without them knowing that it's real footage and not fiction. Stephen King is one of these critics, and he seemingly is the only one that thinks this is real footage. Stanley Kubrick talks about the cinematography and misses the point completely. And David Copperfield, funnily enough, says the house is a riddle, and then the Statue of Liberty disappears. I have no idea why they included that, but it's kind of funny, so I'll let it slide. All of them end their critique by asking Karen what the house represents in her head. Obviously, when questioned, none of these people know that the Navidson Record is real. Like, the whole thing. And I mean that. However, obviously, these people really did not review the Navidson Record. I mean, the Navidson Record obviously isn't real, and you should know that at this point. Johnny even mentions it very early in the book. There's also a ton of points that make the Navidson Record impossible. Literally, people have died in the movie. There's no way they would show in theaters a bullet going through Jed's head. It would literally be a snuff film on the big screen. The movie obviously isn't real, and Zampano is just writing this. After all the interviews, though, it shows Karen made her own film, figuring things out on her end. A film known as A Brief History of Who I Love, which is just a slideshow of photographs taken by the famous photographer, Will Navidson. It shows normal family photos, famous photos he's taken, as well as some of Will Navidson himself. But it ends on one particular, a photo of a starving Sudanese girl, one that Navidson took, with the vulture overhead just about to die. This photo was one of the first things he packed when leaving the house. It's clearly important to him, and it even won Will Navidson a Pulitzer Prize. After this shot is shown on screen, it shows the back of the photo, and on the back only one word is written: Delisle. This is very clearly a reference to Kevin Carter's Pulitzer Prize-winning photo, The Vulture and the Little Girl, and the footnotes even points this out, making it seem even more that the Navidson Record is not a real movie. Johnny says in the footnotes that he is rapidly declining. He got a call from Thumper the other day, the stripper of his dreams, and she invited him over for dinner, clearly concerned about him. Not only does he say no, he thinks that she has no power over him anymore. This is strange and a worrying development because not even 150 pages ago, he was describing how much it meant to him that she listened to him about everything that was going on with the manuscript. Now he doesn't even think of her anymore. The only thing that Johnny thinks of now is the Navidson Record. Another extremely important chapter is chapter 16. This one opens up with a bunch of science talk that I'm too cool personally to understand. But the main point of it is that the samples taken from the labyrinth are so old that the labyrinth has been there before humans have even existed, giving credence to the theory that this is some other dimension or built by aliens or something in the house. This is followed by 17 missing pages. Johnny says that this is his fault in the footnotes. He accidentally dropped some ink on them and that's why they're unsalvageable. He says for some reason he's been thinking more about his mother lately. How she used to write to him all the time with such vivid language. Then eventually, well, something happened. Johnny doesn't say what, but it clearly hurt him. She then apologized to him for this thing years later in her letter. Raymond, his foster father, thinks that Johnny's mother's mental state was due to nightmares, but he's not so sure. Raymond says that's why he keeps guns under his pillow though. They'll scare away the nightmares. Which, remembering what Raymond said, made Johnny think. He has nightmares now, maybe some guns would help. So for a Christmas present for himself, he bought a revolver and a rifle. Chapter 17 opens up with a small excerpt saying that although Reston remained curious about the house, he never thought to go back in a million years, while Navidson did. There are a few theories on why Navidson decided to go back to the house, but all of which pretty much conclude that either he went back to fight his demons and face his past, or because he wanted to show the world that he was the owner of the house and not the other way around. Either way, after everything, Navidson did go back to the house. He leaves Karen a letter though, saying to sell the film, sell the house, sell everything. He loves her and the kids, but he has to go back to the house. In the letter, he talks about everything that he regrets, like his wartime friends who died, and more importantly, Delisle, which we find out was the name of the little girl in the Pulitzer Prize photo he took, or at least the name that he gave her. He feels guilty about Delisle. If he didn't take a few minutes to get her photo, it's possible he could have gotten her to safety or gotten her food, but instead he took a picture, one that he solely benefited from. He was the vulture, not the one in the photo. But above all else in the letter, he describes how much he loves Karen. There is not a single moment in his life that he did not want to give to her. He also mentions that there is a code to decipher somewhere, which Johnny says in the footnotes that the best love letters have a code to decipher by the one they were meant for. This is a super important theory as well on this book that I have later, but just remember that. We start the next chapter with Karen going back to the house as well. Not because of any want or need to, but to find Will Navidson. She goes back to Charlottesville, and her and the realtor that sold them the house are now once again selling the house and talking about ghosts and ghost stories. One of which either has a typo or some old English way of saying something where an S is replaced by an F in a word. It is said surf instead of search. Strangely, in the footnotes, Johnny echoes this little quirk for the next pages, replacing every S with an F. He sold everything he had so he could go to and find the Navidson house himself. He needed to see the house for himself. He wouldn't be able to sleep or do anything, and this could all end once he sees the Navidson house. He might even die if he doesn't find the house. He even sold the locket that his mother gave him. He says that as he sold it, he felt the scars on his arms burn for a second. Perhaps Johnny's mind can manifest things, or perhaps he can't express the things he wants to. He also says he went to go see Luda, who is now in the hospital. The Gdansk man eventually did find him and attacked him before he could even do anything. Johnny says he went to go visit him, and he looked almost worse than Johnny did. Johnny considered even canceling his plans to go to Virginia to find the house, to testify in court for Luda. But Luda says there was no need. Tons of people saw the Gdansk man beat him up, and he honestly should thank Johnny. If Johnny didn't sleep with the Gdansk man's girlfriend, he wouldn't be able to sue the Gdansk man for tons of money. Back in the Navidson record, though, Karen gets back to the house. She gets to the front door and finds herself panicking about going in. She eventually manages to, but then when she goes upstairs to find the labyrinth, the closet is gone. Here she realizes a couple things at once. She won't be able to find Will Navidson now, because if he was here, he would certainly be in the labyrinth. Then one of my favorite quotes in the entire book is here. Now, without a reason to be afraid, Karen suddenly finds herself without a reason to hope. She has nothing to hope for, so she has no reason to be afraid anymore. It reminds me of one of my favorite video game quotes as well. Fear cannot exist without hope, or something along those lines. But at this point, Karen has given in to despair. Navidson is gone, there is no hope, and with that, there is no reason to be afraid. She decides she's going to stay in the house for a while. She looks for any sign of Navidson in the coming days, and for days she finds nothing. Until one night, she hears him somehow, somewhere in the house, like the S.O.S message. She couldn't understand him, but she heard him. She cries and calls Reston. Reston doesn't believe her, honestly, but he starts to drive over anyway. She finds an adapter of which to watch some of the High 8 tapes, until randomly, one of the walls disappears again, turns black, and the labyrinth has reappeared, and Karen doesn't even notice. Navidson is called a photojournalist in chapter 19, not a photographer. This chapter is one of the shortest ones in the book, but it tells a little bit more about Navidson's photo of Delisle. It talks about the feelings of the audience with the photo as well as his thoughts on it. This chapter also says that when Navidson went back to the house had a different vibe to it when no one was in it. And that makes sense. No one should brave the underworld alone, is how the chapter starts. In conjunction with the message of the last chapter, the house is much different when you're alone. Therefore, if the labyrinth is truly an echo of the mind who walks in it, the vibe of the labyrinth will also change along with the house if you're alone in it. Navidson walks in on the first day of April. and takes all the supplies he could possibly need to explore the labyrinth. In addition, he brings a book as well as a bike to travel further. Navidson travels for 5 days with a staggering amount of miles traveled in the labyrinth. During the expedition, something worrying has happened. As the days stretch on, the floor of the labyrinth has started to slope, making it easier to bike, sure, but if you understand how slopes work, eventually you have to go back up them on the way back. 5 or 6 days in, Navidson realizes that he is far past the point of no return. He has traveled hundreds of miles down a slope in 5 or 6 days. There is zero chance he has enough food or water to get back up that slope. The next pages say that the ceiling drops in on him sometimes, and sometimes the ceiling is going higher up. Around this point of the book, the whole page is falling apart. They tell the story of what Navidson is doing in the labyrinth, sure, but the page will always seem nonsensically laid out until you read the words. Navidson keeps going until the ceiling disappears entirely, and then the walls disappear entirely, and then the floor of the labyrinth eventually disappears entirely, until Navidson is just in a black abyss. Now the words on the page could be upside down, or on the sides of the page, or sometimes all over the place, because there is no direction anymore in the labyrinth. Navidson drinks as little as possible to survive as long as possible in the labyrinth. Eventually he becomes more and more disoriented, more sick. He doesn't know which way is up and which way is down. He's been reading this book to stay sane, but he is running out of light, so every time he finishes a page, he burns it for a little light for the next page to read. This is when we get another revelation. The book he is reading here in the labyrinth is House of Leaves, the one you're reading right now. But how is this possible? There's only one possible reason. Once and for all now, this book did not happen. None of the Navidson Record is real. If the fact that supposedly this film was seen by thousands of people and no one remembers, or the fact that they supposedly showed a real guy's brains getting blown out on the big screen didn't tip you off, this should make you realize once and for all that the Navidson Record, as we know it, does not exist. Zampano made the whole thing up. But there is still a little left in the summary here, so let's do that and we'll get to the index as well as why this book even exists in the first place, and why it lies about the Navidson Record. Anyway though, Navidson is now alone, in pitch black. No noise exists in the labyrinth anymore, not even the growl of the Minotaur. Navidson talks to himself about Tom, his kids, Delisle, and most importantly, his girlfriend and seemingly his last moments. Just as the film runs out, he sees a light. He thinks death has finally come for him, but it is not. Chapter 21. Luda is dead. That is how the chapter starts out. No Navidson Record at all in this chapter, just Johnny this time. He says after the Gdansk man put Luda in the hospital, Luda got addicted to pills and hypodermic needles. He got on a motorcycle and crashes, and then died. Johnny wonders why Luda even got addicted. To dull what pain? Johnny figures out it was something Luda must have never talked about. Johnny is going from hotel to hotel to get to Virginia to find the Navidson house, and he's getting worse. Day after day, he's plagued by nightmares and panic attacks. Once in a hotel, he fears the Minotaur is downstairs waiting for him, and he cannot sleep, even calling the hotel an asylum. Maybe a moment of clarity that this is all in his head. Soon later, Johnny says he was wandering a park when he heard the Gdansk man. He guesses Luda wasn't enough. Gdansk man comes up and punches Johnny twice and starts to walk away. Done with the whole thing, finally. But when Johnny is on the ground, he says something stirs in him. Anger and rage from how he was treated, to Luda's death, to everything that's happened to him with the Navidson Record, he had to let it out. Something, anything. So before he knew it, he was on his feet, hands primed to claw into the Gdansk man. Like some primal animal, he slams his hands into the Gdansk man's temple over and over and over. He wants to rip open his chest, break his ribs, and eat his liver. He pounds harder and harder and harder to get to his ribs, and before long, he's dead. But Johnny doesn't stop. Just then, he realizes the Gdansk man's girlfriend, Kyrie, is lunging at him, but he just gets up and stares at her, glares at her so hard that it stops her in her tracks. In an instant, she knows what Johnny is going to do, and she starts to run away, but Johnny catches her. He takes her to a dark place. She knows what he will do to her. He claims he's going to tie her up and rape her and kill her and dismember her piece by piece, somewhere the light will never reach. The Gdansk man is dead, and soon she will be too. The next day, Johnny wakes up and doesn't remember anything. Did any of that really happen? Was it real, or did he make it up? He goes to his hotel room and gets his guns and starts to head over to the house. He then realizes that his perception of time is off. It's not October like the top of the page says, but May. He's truly losing it now. Now more of his ramblings that are nonsensical. He eventually recounts what his father would say to him about his mother. She went to a mental institution, and his dad always called it the whale. Before Johnny even knew what was happening, he was retracing his steps to get there. He found his mother's old room, right where it happened. The closet is still there, her bed is still there. Johnny sleeps in his mom's old bed that night and waits for his mother's ghost to come and either cure him or take him away. But unfortunately, he wakes up the next day like any other. Still as fucked up as when he went to sleep. He goes to the house, finally. But not the house you're thinking of. He doesn't go to the Navidson house. He goes to his old family home where he grew up, and where his mother was taken away from him. He goes there to find a lumber yard in the place of where his house used to be. He remembers when his mother accidentally flung oil on his arms. It was an accident, but Johnny remembers trying to catch the oil as it flung out of the pan, burning his arms up and down. His father rushes in and yells at his mother and protects Johnny. Then he snaps too. He's in the lumber yard with his shirt off, just looking crazy. Someone tells him to go away, so he does. Weeks later, he's in Seattle, which I would love to visit someday, but here he meets an old friend who is a doctor. He saw Johnny and immediately knew something was wrong, and he offered to let Johnny stay with him for a while. Johnny screams in his sleep, and this doctor friend, whose wife was also a doctor, started doing some treatments on him, taking him to hot springs and getting him on some medicine. Miraculously, the medicine works. Like a miracle, everything's cured. The doctors take him to look at the scenery at this gorge, and no one says a word. And before Johnny knows it, he's cured. They see him off, and he leaves ready for his new life. He makes his way to Portland and eats a 7-Eleven burrito, which I don't know why they said that, but he goes back to his car where the medicine is. Only his car and the medicine have both been stolen. Now the story does a little strange thing that we mentioned way earlier in the video. Johnny calls us stupid. The readers. None of that was real. Did we really think he had doctor friends, and even if he did, why would they have some miracle cure? Of course not. Johnny was just telling a story. And remember, Johnny is really good at that. Johnny is really good at telling stories. Remember? Did he even kill the Gdansk man? What happened to the Gdansk man's girlfriend? Was that a story too? Here's the crux of the story where you should understand one truth, and probably the most important truth of the whole book. Johnny cannot be trusted. What he writes, what he doesn't write, we will never know what's true and not true. Any story he could have told this entire time and we would have fallen for it. Is Thumper real? Did he even work at a tattoo shop? What is real? What isn't? We don't know. But we can piece things together, and we'll get back into that point later, but for now, let's continue. Johnny goes back to LA. He sells his car and gets the Navidson Record back from storage. He checks into a hotel and tries to call Luda. Johnny wonders why Luda isn't picking up, but Johnny knows he's dead, so why is Johnny saying that he can't get a hold of Luda for some reason? Is his mental state so far gone that he forgot Luda is dead? The next day, he says the same words at the beginning of the chapter. Luda is dead. Johnny is losing it. The text is now completely nonsensical. He then goes to meet Thumper one more time before he leaves. He tells her everything and she hugs him and wipes his brow where the Gdansk man hit him. And he could tell she wanted a kiss, and a year ago he would have easily done it, but now he knows it wouldn't be right. He leaves. Did that really happen? It's Johnny talking, remember? Who knows what's real and what's not? Almost a year later, he is in Flagstaff, Arizona, which coincidentally is very close to where I live, and he goes to a bar with some live music. He takes some of the last of his money and he gives the band a beer. However, just then he hears them sing about something strange. A 5.5-minute hallway. He cannot believe it. Maybe it's a coincidence, but having seen that he already bought them a beer, he went over to talk to them about it. They said it's based on this book they read and that was on the internet that had taken the world by storm called House of Leaves by Zampano and Johnny Truant. They always wondered what happened to Johnny Truant. They even wondered if they found someone who would love his ironies, which is a code he left on page 117. And if we go all the way back to find this little thing he wrote on that page, and that thing says, West Hotel over wine infusions, light lit lofted on the very entertaining moods, yawning in return, open nights, inviting everyone's song. If you take the first letter of every word of that part, which was in the middle of one of his episodes where he just rambles, it says, who will love my ironies? Johnny says it's pretty impressive that a band member caught that. Now, if you were going to go to that page, it'd be next to impossible to find that. Nothing indicates that the code should be used here, but as we'll see later, it makes perfect sense that this code was used here. The first letter of every word. Anyway, Johnny decides not to tell them that he himself is Johnny Truant, and he leaves them alone. He then starts the next page with the date that he killed the Gdansk man, a full year ago. Did the thing with the band even really happen? Probably not. Johnny was just telling another story. He gets back to his hotel room and he gets his gun ready. He then jumps to the Gdansk man thing again, after he beats him up. Only Johnny doesn't kill him, and his girlfriend just runs away. I believe this is what really happened, and almost everything after he supposedly killed the Gdansk man was a story of Johnny's. Either way, the Gdansk man apologizes about Luda, and that gets Johnny to stop hitting him. He knows he's going to be in trouble if the cops find him now, so he just goes west, to the beach, and he sits down. He has a memory. Finally. He remembers the day his mom was taken from him. She goes down to kiss and hug him one more time before she gets taken away. He remembers now, finally. She hadn't tried to strangle him like he had thought. Not at all. She was wrong. Now, if that last sentence didn't make sense, I know. Johnny never mentioned his mom trying to strangle him, but just roll with it for now. Johnny is relieved. He remembers now. He throws the Navidson record down and burns it. Finally, like some memorial. The last thing Johnny says to us in this book is, "Of course there will always be darkness, but now I realize something inhabits it, historical or not. Sometimes it seems like a cat, the panther with its moon, mad gait, or tiger with stripes of ash and eyes as wild as winter oceans. Sometimes it's the curve of the wrist or what's left of romance, still hiding in the drawer of some long-lost nightstand, or carefully drawn in the margins of an old discarded calendar. Sometimes it's even just vapor trails speeding west, prophetic, over the clouds aglow with dangerous light. Of course, these are only images, my images, and in the end they are born out of something much more akin to a voice, which though invisible to the eye and frequently unheard by even the ear still continues night and day, year after year, to sweep through all of us. Just as you have swept through me, just as I now sweep through you." Does any of this make sense? Johnny's story at all? No. Well, I'll discuss it more after the end of the Navidson Record part of the book. The final part of the Navidson Record is in chapter 22 and 23. It is shown through a camera. Karen is where we left her, in the bedroom with the wall that disappeared. She finally notices and hears something. Or so a lot of people suspect. She hears a Hi-8 camera. She knows that Navidson is in that labyrinth, in that darkness. She just knows it, and as we mentioned earlier, Karen has a violent fear of closed spaces. The labyrinth is her worst nightmare. Somehow, though, through sheer determination, through sheer love of Will Navidson, she enters the labyrinth for the first time. We don't see her do anything in the labyrinth, but seconds later, Karen comes out of the labyrinth with Will Navidson barely being alive on her shoulder. She rescues him. She calls the ambulance and they get there. You might ask what the light was that Navidson talked about as he was about to die in the labyrinth. Well, it was Karen. All of this started and ended with Karen. We mentioned how the labyrinth is changed by the mental state of the person in it. So is it a coincidence that the light was both metaphorically and physically Karen? Karen actually was the conqueror of the labyrinth. She was the one who saved Will. She was the light of his life. And now she was the light who saved him. In the hospital, Will Navidson's temperature was taken and it was in the low 80s. I don't even know if that's possible, but he was alive. Karen then stays with him for the entire time that he recovers. Days upon days. Chapter 23. It's now October, over a year later. Will Navidson is better. Better than when he started the whole thing, actually. He had some problems with his feet before the story started, and now it's cured. He then shows a collage of his family and even shows that finally, after everything, Will Navidson finally marries Karen. Now, Karen Navidson. The final shots of the movie are of a happy family having fun on Halloween, watching a Halloween parade walk by, only for the empty streets to be the last shots. As the street lamp flickers out, the screen goes black. That's it. That's the end of the Navidson Record, and also the end of Johnny's story. But there's still some unanswered questions, obviously. This entire thing might sound completely nonsensical, but there's some stuff in the index that will make it make sense. All of it. And I would suggest you check them out yourself, but here's a super important key, and it gives context to the whole story. It's going to blow the lid off of the whole story and make everything make sense that I've said. There's a lot of stuff in the index, but Appendix 2E is the key to everything. And I mean, it will make almost every single thing in the book make sense. They are letters from Johnny Truant's mom. All the letters are from his mother from when she was in the mental institution, or as it's called in the book, the Whale. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'm going to read the important ones. These are also the part of the book that I mentioned very early in the video where it was gripping me and there was a pit in my stomach turning every single page with such anxiety. But let's just start with the first letter that Johnny's mom sent to him. My dear child, your mother is here. Not altogether here, but nonetheless. It has been a tough year for her, but no doubt a tougher one for you. The director tells me you have a foster family now. Open your heart to them. They are there for you. They will help you recover from your father's untimely death. They will also help you comprehend the reasons for my stay here. Remember, your mother loves you, despite her crumbling biology. Also remember, love inhabits more than just heart and mind. If need, love can even take shelter in a big toe. A big toe for you then. I love you. Mommy. July 28th, 1982. From this first letter, it seems that Johnny and his mother have a good relationship. She knows why she's in the Whale, and she's pretty lucid. Dearest Johnny, you would have received 100 more letters before now if the director had not strongly recommended I curtail my epistolary efforts. Apparently, your novel mere object to intrusive and diversive nature of my communiques. I have no idea what that means or what I just read, by the way. Well, hard as this is for me to say, she's probably right. So is the director. He's a good man. You don't need to be troubled by your mad mother. You need to build a new life. A solid life. As old Goethe wrote, wouldst shape a noble life? Then cast no backwards glances toward the past, and though somewhat be lost and gone, yet do thou act a new one born. Open your heart to the kindness and stability of your new family offers you. All of it will serve you well, and as for me, I only wish to serve that purpose. Happy New Year. Good things are coming your way. You know I love you dearly. Mommy. January 20th, 1983. This one shows us a couple things. Johnny's mom is very eloquent, or at least she knows a lot about mythology and literature and a lot of big words. She is smart, but the director of the Whale knows something's not right here. She is sending lots of letters to Johnny. Now, it's understandable. Johnny is all she has left now. Her husband, Johnny's father, died in a truck accident, remember? And she doesn't seem to have any family other than Johnny. What else can you do in a mental facility other than lie there and think and write letters to the only person you know? And this is in 1983. It isn't like today. Mental facilities were sometimes very bad. Dearest son, do not think I did not write you in March. I was just writing badly. Again, at the director's urging, he is a decent man, I didn't send you my notes. Opete rightly. He brought you to my attention how indelicate some of their themes might be for a boy your age. I'm silly. I keep forgetting you're only 11 and go on treating you like a grown man. Perhaps in the future sometime I will share with you my thoughts over the last few weeks and you can advise me on their content. Until then, savor your youth, and I, albeit in absentia, will do my best to protect it. Good news to hear you are finally settling down. There are better meals in this world than hot dogs and sterno. The director tells me you are getting along well with your new guardian, a former Marine, and have a few siblings as well. Hopefully this means you have succeeded in wresting the modicum of happiness for yourself. Modicum? Is that a word you know? If not, let me offer you some instruction in at least one area. Get the dictionary and be relentless about your visits there. Never to neglect your mind, Johnny. You are born with substantial faculties. I am sending you several books, including a concise Oxford English dictionary. The volumes of poetry may be too advanced for you right now, but in time your curiosity will unlock their secrets. Eternally yours, Mommy. April 27th, 1983. This one's getting a little more concerning. She is telling Johnny about something adult-like, when he's only 11. She also learns about Raymond, but she still very clearly loves her son. But it's getting a little worse. My cherished Johnny, I dreamt about you last night. You had long hands which glistened in the starlight. There was no moon, yet your arms and legs seemed to be made of water and changed with the tides. You were so beautiful and elegant and all blue and white, and your eyes, like your father's eyes, were infused with strange magic. It was comforting to see you so strong. Gods assembled around you and paid their respects and doted on you and offered gifts your mother could not even begin to imagine, let alone afford. There were some gods who were jealous of you, but I shooed them away. The rest kept to you and said many great things about your future. Unfortunately, the dream would not permit me to hear the exact words. I was only privy to an impression. But what an impression! Of course the dreams are tricky things, but since this one seems so full of positive omens, I decided to share it with you here. May your summer be full of root beer, joy, and play, with terrible amounts of love. Mommy, August 19th, 1983. This is strange. She's not doing well, clearly. She is hallucinating. It's not clear what she has, but from what I hear online, it's probably either schizophrenia or dementia. However, I don't know exactly, so I apologize if I get that point wrong. My dear cherished Johnny, forgive your mother. News of your hospitalization sent me into a kind of self-indulgent behavior that serves no one, least of all you. I am so sorry. For a day, your mother was even free. So overwrought by her son's misfortune, she escaped this old English manor in search of his tormentor. As it was raining and thundering, the director claims I outdid Lair. Not even lightning could outlight my rage. In fact, my rage was so great that the attendants here had to fit me with a canvas suit lest I hurt them or further damage myself. The director finally modified and even increased my medications. Eventually, these measures took effect, and my hate diminished. Though never the pain. Unfortunately, so did my ability to function coherently, hence my silence during the time of your trouble. When you needed me most, I failed. I am sorry, as I am ashamed. I shall never behave that way again, I promise. Time does heal, they say. Still, were I free now, I would head straight for the Marine man Raymond and end him. I don't doubt even your pacific father would have resorted to violence. I do long hear the details from your tender lips. Please write me as soon as possible and recount everything. The telling will help, I assure you. Did he really break your nose and snap your teeth? Are there still contusions on your face? I confess, even having to write these questions stirs a frenzy in the chambers of my soul. I would like nothing more than to tear out the liver of your perpetrated protector and feed it to him with a hiss. He could semper fi that meal all the way down to Hades. But since he is shielded from my wrath by my own confusions, damn it! I shall invoke Hecate in her Acheron depths. And by scale of dragon, eye of newt, boiled in blood of murdering ministries and Clymenstra's gall, cast a great curse which will fly directly on the dark wind and take immediate residence in his body, daily chewing on his flesh, tightly gnawing on his bones, until many months from now, moments before the final spark of self-awareness expires, he will have witnessed the total dismemberment and consumption of every limb and organ. So is written, so is done. The curse is cast. Fuit illum. And now, without a doubt, you see your mother is mad. Irrefuro brevest est. Though in her case not so brief. At least you shall have a new family. Hopefully this one will be gracious and sympathetic. Your mother mends you with kisses and gentle strokes. Mommy, March 15th, 1984. Here we can start to see some of the cracks forming heavily. This is obviously from when Raymond broke Johnny's teeth. No one believes him, and we know what happened, but from the summary we obviously know what happened here. Now to address the elephant in the room. She escaped the whale to go and try and harm or kill Raymond, which she obviously could not do. I understand she's his mother and someone harmed her son, and I'd be pissed too, I'm sure, but this is probably too much. Not only that, writing an 11 or 12-year-old about how you were going to kill his foster father is not okay. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. I cannot even think how Johnny must take these. He's a teenager or a preteen. He's developing, and having your mom send you these horrible letters and knowing you're the only one she can rely on must be a horrible feeling. Not only that, like us with Johnny during the events of the Navidson Record, we don't know what is really happening here. Johnny knows his mom is sick, very sick. She sometimes doesn't know what is reality. It's sad. Dear sweet Johnny, I am still alive. Unfortunately, the dead of winter was not kind to your mother, as she reverted to the state that brought her here in the first place, the very same state that your glimmering father wrestled with so nobly. Everyone here, especially the honest director, was kind and attentive, but their efforts could still not break me from the wild and often, I'm afraid to admit, hallucinatory condition. Sad but true. Sometimes your mother hears things. Non sum qualis eram. At least thoughts of you brought me moments of peace. Just the mention of Johnny conjured up sweet memories of rain-soaked meadows, mint springs and tea, and sailboats slewing wakes of phosphorus at midnight. An entire history of stars briefly caught in the sound. My lovely son, please pardon your mother's silence. Only yesterday did the director show me your letters. I feel terrible that I let you down like this, and yet at the same time I feel proud that you continue to make such progress. Right now I am too tired to write a longer letter, but never you fear, you will hear from me again soon enough. I love you. Mommy, March 7th, 1985. Did you hear what she said? Non sum qualis eram. Where have we heard that before? When Johnny first encountered the Minotaur. This right here is when it clicked for me. Everything clicked. When you go through the story, it is most obviously that the Minotaur is not real. The thing chasing Johnny. It's in his head. I thought he was going crazy and seeing things, but here's my first theory on the book. Johnny cannot handle what happened to his mother, and all this time his mind has been playing tricks on him due to repressed trauma. There's no Minotaur. The Minotaur has been Johnny's mother. There are so many things that make sense, however, we'll get into that after the summary of this, so hang on, we're almost there now. Other than that, however, Johnny's mom didn't mail him all winter. She was reverted to a really bad space in her head. But she's better now, and I'm sure she won't relapse. Right? My dear son, the only son I have, your mother must hear from you. She is without ally. The new director pays no attention to her pleas. The attendants laugh behind her back, and now, worst of all, her only guiding light has vanished. Not a word, not a sign, not a thing. I relive your visit every waking moment. Did I miss-see it all? Were you put off, embarrassed, disappointed, determined to depart forever, gritting your teeth until the hour kindly allowed you to go? And me, did I see all of this and misinterpret your smiles and chuckles as examples of love, affection, and childlike devotion? Not getting it at all? Missing it all? At least don't allow your mother's grave to lack the company of knowledge she craves. If your plan is to abandon me, at least grant me the last respect. Rompido mi muñeca, your tearful and terribly confused mother. August 23rd, 1985. Johnny visited his mother a while ago, and I did leave that out, but it's more important that she feels worse off now after he visited her. I think Johnny knows this too, hence why he's keeping his distance. He's also got his own life to deal with though. He doesn't want to keep his distance, of course. He loves his mother very much, but the more and more he sees her, the more and more she writes him, and then the worse and worse she gets, as she cannot see Johnny every second of every day. He is a person. It's horrible to think about, but what can you do if you were Johnny here? Try to love your mother and keep seeing her as much as possible, although it's making her worse when you aren't there? Or disown your mother, not out of hate, but out of love, so you can flourish like she would want if she were healthy? Or neither. It's a horrible situation either way, and on top of it, her mind seems to be getting worse. Dearest Johnny, I am doing my best to accept your decision to leave me in such silence. Hearing it makes my ears bleed. The new director doesn't approve when I use candle wax to keep the sound out of it. That's the best I can do at levity. I remember when your father would take me flying. I did not go very often. The experience always left me agitated for days. He, however, was always so calm and delicate about everything. Pre-flight preparations were carried out with the care and pediatrician, and once we were off, despite the roar of the engine, he treated all of those thousands of miles like a whisper. I always wore earplugs, but they did nothing to keep out the noise. Donnie was oblivious. I honestly don't believe he heard all the rattling and wind whipping and all the awful shuddering sounds the plane made whenever it was intersected a particularly unruly passage of air. He was the most peaceful man I ever knew. Up there especially. Even on that awful chaotic day when he had no choice but to take me here, he remained calm and tender. By then his heart was broken, though he didn't know it yet. No one did. But even so, his touch remained gentle and his words edgeless as the way he flew his plane far above the clouds. I wish I could have his peace now. I wish I didn't have to hear the rattle and roar and scream of that is your silence. I wish I could be him. I'm sorry you saw what you saw in me. I'm sorry I made you run. I must understand. I must accept. I must let you go. But it's hard. You're all I have. Love's love and more. Mom. September 5th, 1985. This is when it starts to get kind of dark. She's harming herself now. She also thinks there's a new director. Obviously it's the same one, but she doesn't understand that. There are still moments of clarity though. She knows what she's doing to him. She understands it, but she cannot help it. She needs him. And I get it, it's just a really bad situation. Dear Johnny. Dear Johnny, this is somewhat urgent. I've gotten an attendant to mail this. He will take it beyond the Whale's Toe grounds and thus help avoid the new director's prying eyes. As I indicated in my last letter, I've grown increasingly suspicious about the staff here, especially when my personal care is concerned. I need to feel we can correspond without interference. For now, all you need to do is place in your next letter a little check mark in the lower right-hand corner. That way I know you received this letter. Don't make the check mark too big or too small, or else the new director will know something's afoot. He's an exceedingly sly man and will be able to grasp any effort to exclude him. So make it a simple checkmark, our little code. So effortless and yet so rich in communication. Don't tarry. Respond to your mother in a hurry. I need to know if this attendant is trustworthy. In general, they are a sordid lot. They're supposed to make my bed every day. A week has passed since they last touched these scrappy blue things they have the authority to refer to as linen. With love and heartfelt thanks, Mom. September 19th, 1985. Another absolutely huge piece of the puzzle to one of my theories here. First of all, yes, she's getting horribly worse. She thinks all the staff are out to get her. They obviously aren't, but to her they are. It's causing tons of pain. But that one line about the checkmark. I want you to go to page 97 of the book. At the very right bottom of the page, just like the letter says, is a checkmark. What does this mean? How can this be possible? How can Zampano knows Johnny's mom, and let alone Johnny's mom's code only for Johnny? What is going on here? Well, that leads me to the second theory. Johnny and Zampano are the same person. Johnny made Zampano up for the story. The whole book is written by Johnny for his mother. I'll let you stir on that one as there's more evidence we need to talk about, but once again we'll get to it after the summary. Dear, dear flesh of mine, spirit of mine, my Johnny, Alaska again. 2 words and an exclamation point. Is that all you can spare your mother? I need you. Need. There. I failed. My resolve to independ from you has collapsed. I need. You spend 2 words, a punctuation point, and not even a visit? La Grima. Don't you miss her? This huddled puddle of a mother? The shape that gave you shape? Fed you, warmed you, waned you over? Good God, I've never been afraid like this. An even more frightening exclamation when the exclamant is an atheist. Love hopelessly, Mom. May 31st, 1986. Things are getting bad. That moment of clarity is gone. She has reverted to needing Johnny. He is all she has, and she cannot think of any position Johnny is in here. My dearest gifted Johnny. I did not think your silence would ever end, and yet somehow it did, and I am now in a blissful possession of a new address and news of your placement in another boarding school. Perhaps you will soon have time to return to your mother, whom, by abandoning, you have left unprotected by the devilry committed too many times by too many miscreants too faceless to remember. There is no escape for me now. I know the new director knows I know this. In turn, he knows I know he knows. These pages are my only flight. At least they escape. My years steepen, my secrets crack and crumble. Not even my only family, my only boy comes to see me. When they murder me, how will you feel? P. April 25th, 1987. She is now fully guilting Johnny. She obviously isn't trying to, but imagine you get a letter from your mother. She says someone is trying to murder her, but you know it's only in her head. You know she's not well. She thinks it's true and she's horrified, but nothing you can say can make her believe you. Listen, I love my mother, and this makes me wonder how I would feel in this situation, because me and my mother are very close. I even almost got her to read the part of Johnny's mother in this video, but this is just sad. Disturbing and sad. What do you do in this situation? I don't know, and neither does Johnny, clearly. Dear, dear Johnny, pay attention. The next letter I will encode as follows. Use the first letter of each word to build subsequent words and phrases. Your exquisite intuition will help you sort out the spaces. I've sent this via a night nurse. Our secret will be safe. Tenderly, Mom. Where have we heard that before? Perhaps when Johnny was talking to the band at the end of the summary of the Navidson Record? Not only that, this is a setup for one of the more disturbing things in the book. I'm not going to read the whole next message as it's super long, so we're only going to be grabbing the first letter of each word. But the message itself that's encoded is, Dearest Johnny, they have found a way to break me. Rape a 56-year-old bag of bones. There is no worse, and don't believe otherwise. The attendants do it. Others do it. Not every day, not every week, maybe not even every month. But they do it. Someone I don't know always comes. When it's dark, late, I've learned not to scream. Screaming gave me hope, and unanswered hope is shattered hope. Think of your Haitian. It is far saner to choose rape than shattered hope. So I submit and I drift. I let caprice and a certain degree of free association take me away. Sometimes I'm still away long after it's done, after he's gone. The stranger, the attendant, the custodian, the janitor, cleaning man, waiting man, dirty man. The night tidying up after him. I'm in hell giving into heaven where sometimes I think of your beautiful father with his dreamy wings, and only then do I allow myself to cry. Not because your mother was raped, again, but because she has loved so much what she could never have been allowed to keep. Such a silly girl. You must save me, Johnny. In the name of your father, I must escape this place or I will die. This is not okay. This is so not okay. Not only does she think she is going to be murdered here, she accuses the attendants of raping her. To her adolescent son. He knows they haven't, but in Johnny's mom's mind, they have. And it's every bit as real as she can think. But thinking of her husband as she gets raped is really dark. I don't even know what to say about it. Dearest Johnny, I write to you now with the greatest urgency. Your failure to respond or even appear I forgive completely. All previous things I have been subjected to pale in comparison of this latest turn of events. I will be lucky if I even live out this hour. I cannot even leave my bed. The new director, the new director, the new director, the new director. September 24th, 1987. She's fully gone now. The sensibility's gone. You can see her decline the whole time throughout her letters, and it's horrible. It reminds me of the end of Flowers for Algernon, as you see the main character regress in writing, and the same thing happens here. There's nothing scarier than what you see from these next few coming letters. January 3rd, 1988. Sweet, sweet Johnny, though you never ask how many times I must respond. It was an accident. 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 Here's another horrifying thing. She now blames herself for the oil and the scars on Johnny's arms, and not only this, she writes it over and over and over. It's all she thinks about. She thinks Johnny hates her because of this. Johnny gets these letters, and I cannot even imagine how he feels. It makes me sick to think of my mother in that kind of pain. Blaming herself for the accident that she did not even mean to do, and it makes her think that Johnny hates her every second of every day. Dearest dear Johnny, do not forget your father stopped and took me to the whale's toe. You may remember, you may not. You were 7. It was the last time I saw you before I saw you again too many years later, only to lose sight of you again. Oh, my child, my dear solitary boy who abuses his mother with his silence, who mocks her with his unsupportable absence. How can you even understand the awful weight of living, so ridiculously riddled with so many lies of tranquility and bliss? At best half covering, but never actually easing the crushing weight of it all, merely guaranteeing a lifetime of the same, year after year after year after year after year after year, and for what? You were leaving as I was leaving, and so I tried before the great leaving to grant you the greatest gift of all, the purest gift of all, the gift to end it all, the gift to end all gifts. I kissed your cheeks and your head, and after a while I put my hands around your throat. Flow red your face got, and even as your tiny 080 delicate hands stayed clamped around my wrists, but you did not struggle the way I anticipated. You probably understood what I was trying to do for you. You were probably grateful. Yes, you were grateful. Eventually, though, your eyes became glassy and wandered away. Your grip loosened and you wet yourself. You did more than wet yourself. I'll never know how close you came to that fabled edge because your father suddenly arrived and roared an intervention. A battering blast of complete nonsense, but a word just the same and full of love too. Powerful enough, in fact, to halt the actions of another love, break its hold, even knock me back and free you from me. Myself and my infinite wish. You were a mess, but aside from a few evil coughs and dirty little pants and some half-moon cuts on the back of your neck, you recovered quickly enough. I did not. I had long, ridiculous purple nails back then. The first thing they did when I got here was tie me down and cut them off. But it was love just the same, Johnny. Believe me, for that should I be ashamed? For wanting to protect you from the pain of living, from the pain of loving, always from loving, always for loving, always. Perhaps my shame should really come from my failure. Tears just the same. P. Here we are. The entire Navidson record is just a way for Johnny to cope with the relationship he had with his mother. At the very end, when Johnny finds closure, he remembers that his mom did not try to choke him, but hugged him. He thought she did it because of this letter right here. The whole trauma of his mother and everything on the Navidson record is right here in this letter. She also has purple nails. Remember that, we'll get back to it. The next couple letters are nonsensical, some of which just have Johnny's name written over and over and over. All she can do is think of how her son must hate her. He doesn't, obviously, but once again, in her mind, he does. And he's the only person she has. But finally, in November 1st of 1988, Dearest Johnny, what a terrible sleep and dream I've been roused from. There are so many pieces I'd like to make sense of. The doctors all warned me just to put aside the last 2 years. It's in shambles. Seems I'm better off consigning the whole lot to psychosis, locking it up and throwing away the keys. They tell me I should be grateful that presents itself as an option. I suppose they're right. Cast no backwards glances, eh? The doctors also informed me that you visited several times, but apparently I was completely unresponsive. As for all the letters I said I had written you, chock full of paranoia and all, I hardly wrote a thing. 5 reams of paper and postage were nothing more than fragments of my imagination. I tend to believe all this because, as you probably realized when you came here, that the new director is in fact none other than the old director. The patient one, the decent one, the honest one, the kind one who had been taking care of your mother far over 10 years. I have now my own biochemical cycles and a couple of new drugs to thank for this new clarity. The director has already warned me that my lucidity may not last forever. In fact, it's unlikely. I shall be fine as long as I know the one whose tender sensibilities I impose such hogwash will forgive me. How could I misplace your visits, lose your letters, not even recognize you? I love you so very much. Will you ever forgive me? As always, all my love, Mommy. After all of that, she just pretends it didn't happen. All she put him through for over a year, these horrible letters, she just wants to pretend they didn't happen. What would that do to someone? Well, here it is. Johnny Truant is what happens. The Navidson Record is what happens. She has a couple letters that are normal for her after this, but I want to explain the term terminal lucidity. It is a term that refers to how it has been observed how our people suffering from dementia, especially at the very end, gain some clarity back just for a little bit before they pass away. Like a miraculous clarity. Like it seems they are about to die without memory, and then suddenly for a bit before they die, they remember everything. It is unknown why this happens, but it does. In real life, not just in the book. But you see where this is going, right? Let's continue. The letters are interrupted by a letter that Johnny gets from the whale's director, actually. Dear Mr. Blank, as you requested in your last visit, I am now writing to inform you that your mother's condition may again be on the decline. We are doing her best to adjust her medication, and while this relapse could prove temporary, you may want to prepare yourself for the worst. If there are any questions I can answer, please do not hesitate to contact me at blank. Also, I wish to remind you that I will be retiring at the end of March. Dr. David J. Drains will be taking my place. He is very capable and well versed in psychiatric care. He will provide your mother with the very best treatment. Sincerely yours, blank MD, PhD, Director, the 3 Attic Whale's Toe Institute. Johnny's mom is on the decline again. This is not good, and after this she sends her final letter. May 3rd, 1989. Dear John, with no luggage to speak of, amethyst, lilac, or otherwise, I've had nowhere to put my things and I've lost all of it. To be honest, I don't know where all of it went. Clearly the worker bees have stolen it. By the way, I was mistaken. The director didn't leave. He's still here. The new one is the same one after all. In other words, everything is fine. Though the old director's moods have been a little odd lately. I think I've upset him somehow. There's something malicious in his manner now. Very slight, but noticeable just the same. A nasty twisting wire woven into the fabric of an otherwise perfectly decent man. No matter. I cannot tire myself on the feelings of the world. I am leaving after all. Though it is no easy task, especially for this old Sibyl of Cumae. Climbs of any kind are trying. Frankly, I'm exhausted by all the planning and the paperwork. Donnie will pick me up soon. Very soon. But you, my dear child, you should stay a while. Do that for me. Me. Right after this letter, this is sent. Mr. John Blank, May 5th, 1989. Dear Mr. Blank, we regret to inform you that on May 4th, 1989, at approximately 8:45 p.m., your mother, Pelafina Heather Livier, died in her room, 3 Attic Whales Institute. After a detailed examination, both our resident doctor, Thomason Janovich, MD, as well as the country coroner, confirmed that the cause of death was a result of a self-inflicted asphyxiation achieved with bed linen, hung from the closet hook. Mrs. Livier was 59. Please permit us to express our sincere condolences over your terrible loss. Perhaps it will be of some solace to know that despite the severity of her mental affliction, your mother managed to show much humor in her last year, and the attendant said she often spoke fondly of her only son. While this will be a difficult time, we urge you to contact us as soon as possible to make arrangements for her burial. The conditions of her enrollment here are already provided with standard cremation. However, for an additional $3,000, We will happily provide a proper casket and service. For another $1,000, a burial plot may also be secured at the nearby Wayne Cemetery. Again, we wish to extend our sympathies over the death of Mrs. Levier. If we can be of any help during this time of need, whether by asking questions or assisting you with funeral plans, please feel free to contact us directly at blank. Respectfully yours, David J. Drains, MD, Director of the Three Attic Whale Toe Institute. Johnny's mom kills herself with the bed sheets in the closet. Why? We don't know. But there is a non-zero chance that she thought that Johnny hated her, and that was why. It's probably not true, but after all those letters, Johnny probably thinks that he had something to do with it. And with that, the end of the Navidson Record. Let me explain those three theories now and give evidence. Theory 1. Johnny cannot handle what happened to his mother, and that is why he is seeing all of this. There are several times that Johnny sees the Minotaur, or rather doesn't see but senses. The first time is in the tattoo shop while he's looking at ink. When he gets to the purple ink, it happens. Now, I don't know if you remember me mentioning it, but Pelafina said she choked him with long purple nails. Johnny's mom always wore that purple nail polish. This is sort of a trigger. Every time that the Minotaur is noticed by Johnny, purple is always mentioned. I'm serious, go back in the video even. I mention it every single time he sees the Minotaur. The second time he is refilling ink in the tattoo shop. When he gets to the purple ink, he is attacked again by the Minotaur. The whole book is Johnny coping with what happened to his mother. That's all. And the only way he knows how to cope, by telling a story. Another story that Johnny mentions that is oh so obviously about his mother is about his Pekingese. I don't know if you remember, he meets a woman named Johnny, but it's spelled differently, but it's obviously supposed to be him, who finds this Pekingese and then throws it with extreme force, enough to make him think that the woman hates this dog. The dog is supposed to be his mother in this allegory. But why a Minotaur? Well, that goes to Theory 2. Theory 2. Johnny and Zampano are the same person. There are several times that Johnny mentions in the book that he feels Zampano is in him. I even mentioned it once myself in the summary. I also want to mention the name Zampano. This evidence I didn't notice myself, but I found online. The name Zampano comes from the movie La Strada, an Italian movie, where Zampano, a strong man in a circus act, takes a young girl under his wing as a performer. During the movie, the two grow close and join a circus. Zampano eventually kills someone in self-defense, and the young girl is with him and she becomes traumatized by watching it. Zampano eventually abandons her because he cannot take care of her, despite loving her very much. Many years later, he hears a song that the young girl used to sing, only to find out it's a woman who, after he abandoned her, rescued her on the beach. She eventually fell ill and died, however. Zampano, distraught over the death of the girl that he loved, goes to the beach and cries. Does that sound familiar? Johnny loves his mother, but she becomes mentally ill, and because of that, even though he loves her, he cannot take care of her. He doesn't abandon her, but he keeps his distance to not get hurt. She dies. Johnny cannot handle it all and ends up on a beach, crying. Zampano is Johnny. There's even a moment later on where Johnny's mother calls him Zampano. Another hint is in the Navidson Record. Do you remember the chapter that everything was all crossed out on? The one about the Minotaur, and how Zampano said that he theorizes that the Minotaur was actually the king's disfigured son, whom he loves, but he has to distance himself from even though he loves him? Well, Johnny's mom is his Minotaur. If you want to go deeper, Will Navidson's Minotaur is his relationship. It only shows up after his family goes to the west coast for a wedding. He had probably thought about this Minotaur then. Then the labyrinth, which held the Minotaur, is the house. Finally, I believe Johnny wrote this book for his mother. Remember the checkmark on page 97 and his mother's letter? I believe this may be a way to honor his dead mother, by once again doing the only thing he knows how to do, telling her a story. The checkmark means it's for his mother. It's their little code. Remember how I said that love letters usually have a code that only the person they're for can notice? Well, the checkmark is Johnny and his mom's code. Now, I mentioned way back at the beginning that I believe there is something with the actual writer, Margazy Danielowski, is saying in this book. I believe this whole book is a letter to his mother, or for her rather. If you find any interview with this guy, he will never bring up his mother. Ever.
I believe it is very possible that this is for, or based on him and his mother's relationship and his coping with it. It's not an unlikely theory that Johnny is somewhat of a self-insert for himself. But, like I said at the beginning of this as well, there are tons of theories in this book. None of them are really confirmed or denied. This is just what I think. I also want you to remember the first thing you read when you opened this book as well. This is not for you. It's not for us. It's for Mark Z. Danielewski's mother. And I believe, whether she's around anymore or not, she is the only one that knows the whole truth of this book. One last thing. There's something I lied about, or I didn't mention. I pulled a little Johnny truant. I mentioned the last thing Johnny said was about his memory returning on the beach. Well, I lied. He says one more thing after that. One thing that I don't understand, and it doesn't seem to fit anywhere. And from what I understand, no one understands it. It's a story that he says his doctor friend told him. But remember, he already said that that doctor friend wasn't real. So who told him this story? And why? The story is about a mother. She gives birth to a baby boy with severe problems. He probably would never live normally, or even really live at all. The doctor recommends that they pull the plug on the newborn. But the mother, right after giving birth, says she wants to talk to the baby for a bit. So she does. She sings to him. Days straight. Longer than anyone should ever be able to do after giving birth. People start watching in awe. She shouldn't be able to do this without sleeping right after using all of that energy to give birth. The doctors start to watch, the patients start to watch, and word spreads throughout town that this is some kind of miracle. Everyone starts to believe that this child might just live because of his mother. Until finally the mother turns to the doctor and tells him that it's time. She's ready to pull the plug on her son. He's astonished after all of that, but he agrees. She says she wants to say a few final words before they do it, however. She tells the baby boy that it's okay. She loves him and he can let go. Then, before anyone can even get near the plug to pull it, the baby flatlines, as if responding to his mother's own words without understanding her. What does this story mean? I don't know. I want you to tell me your theory. But that's it. This is the longest video I have ever done in this format by a long shot, and I don't even know when this will be released. I'm finishing the script on September 5th, so you can figure it out. I want to leave you with this at the end of our journey. A poem in the poem section of the index. Little solace comes to those who grieve, when thoughts keep drifting, as walls keep shifting, and this great blue world of ours seems a house of leaves. Moments before the wind.